It's the year of the tiger, but Joe Exotic didn't get what he wanted. The animals in PETA did, and now the big cat industry is just about dead. Still, there's a new concern: bears, of Dolly the Bear and the foxes, plus the new target going after the bear cub petting industry. Next on the PETA Podcast. Welcome to the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil Guillermo, your host for this inside look at animal rights, brought to you by PETA, the largest animal rights organization in the world. On today's episode, it's the year of the tiger, but that doesn't mean prosperity for the Tiger King, Joe Maldonado Passage, aka Joe Exotic. At his resentencing, Passage, who was convicted in the murder-for-hire case against an animal rights activist, Carole Baskin, thought he might catch a break, but his 22-year sentence was reduced to 21. It's not looking good either for the big cat industry. The Tiger King on Netflix may have made Joe Exotic a cult figure, but it's also shown how PETA has virtually ended the tiger petting industry. It's just one of the big developments from PETA's CALE group. That would be the Captive Animal Law Enforcement Group led by Deputy General Counsel Brittany Peet. Peet told me her new focus on the roadside zoo front was now the bear cub petting industry. Most recently, CALE has rescued the 76th bear PETA has saved, a North American black bear named Dolly, who was being kept at a defunct roadside zoo in Michigan. But first we talked about Joe Exotic and how the Tiger King Netflix series hastened the end of the tiger cub abuse at roadside zoos. My conversation with PETA's Brittany Peet on the PETA Podcast.
I think that Tiger King season 2, including the Doc Antle episodes, did redeem itself in a way. Tiger King 1 was extremely helpful in the campaign to end big cat cub petting, but it did have some dangerous messaging and misleading messaging about Carole Baskin, for example. But in season 2, we saw the downfall of Jeff Lowe. We saw the downfall of Tim Stark, two of the kingpins of the big cat cub petting industry, both of whom PETA had huge roles in taking down. You know, if I had one complaint, I think that, you know, the series didn't reveal PETA's roles in those cases so much. And so that was disappointing. But it did highlight the abuse and neglect of big cats and other animals at these facilities. And it showed the monsters that these abusers are. In the Doc Antle episodes, it alleged, or it showed interviews with a number of women who allege that Doc Antle raped them when they were children, when they were minors. You know, so I think that the impact of Tiger King isn't over, even though Tiger King itself probably is. But overall, I was pleased with season 2.
You don't think there's going to be a season 3?
I don't think so. We'll see. You never know.
Joe Exotic in prison?
Yeah, exactly. Joe was just resentenced, and his sentence was reduced by 1 year, from 22 years to 21 years.
Well, that made headlines that he was up for resentencing. I guess he thought that he was going to get a break, but they reduced it by 1 year. That's kind of like a slap in the face, huh?
Yeah, it really is. Hope springs eternal with Joe. I think he was really confident that he was going to get out of prison, just like he was so confident at his trial that he was going to be acquitted. I mean, I think one of the things that we often talk about in relation to these big cat exploiters, you know, men who are going into cages with tigers, they have narcissistic characteristics. And I don't think that Joe ever really believes that anything bad can happen to him, even though it keeps, thankfully, you know, these things do keep happening. And thankfully, Joe was wrong. And it's likely that he will be spending the rest of his life in prison.
Yeah, and does he have much connection with the outside world from prison? I mean, you hear stories about convicts in prison who run drug rings and all that sort of thing from their jail cell or their prison cell. Is that a kind of thing that we might see come out in this case?
I definitely don't think that we're going to be seeing Joe orchestrating the abuse and exploitation of animals from prison. Thanks to PETA's work, the big cat cub petting industry has basically been decimated. We've taken out the major breeders, Joe himself, Tim Stark, Jeff Lowe, Dade City's Wild Things. There are really only two of these exploiters left, Doc Antle and Mario Tabrawi. Doc Antle is already facing charges in Virginia for cruelty to animals and for trafficking in endangered species. So this industry is on its last legs. And Joe, by all accounts, doesn't have a lot of connection with the outside world. He recently published a book that was received with a whimper. And, due to COVID restrictions, I don't think he can even receive visitors, so he is able to talk on the phone and send letters. And I think that's mostly how he communicates.
So he got a little bump from this resentencing, which reduced his sentence by 1 year. Are we going to hear from him again, or is that probably it, you think?
Well, we'll see. I mean, he and his attorney have been rumbling about trying to get a new trial. There's really virtually no chance of that happening. Joe's attorney was also the attorney who, for a time, represented Don Lewis, Carol Baskin's former husband who disappeared. He represented his family for a while and before he was fired, and then moved on to Joe. And so he has this history of representing high-profile clients, making big promises and not delivering.
Yeah. How is Carol Baskin taking all this? Is she's still thriving now?
Carol was in Oklahoma City for the resentencing, and she was thrilled that with the results that once again she can hopefully sleep soundly knowing that Joe will not be released from prison anytime soon to be a threat to her again.
Yeah. Now, just to reiterate, the conviction of Joe Maldonado Passage, was for the murder for hire case that involved Carol Baskin. Does she feel threatened still, even though he's in prison, or does she feel like she can put that aside and move on with her life?
Well, I know after the first season of Tiger King, and probably after the second season too, or second season also, she was receiving threats from members of the public because of her portrayal and the supposition without evidence that she was involved in her ex-husband's disappearance. There were additional theories put forward in the new season. The new season exposed Don Lewis's own alleged pedophilia and bad people that he was involved with. So the second season did speculate about other potentialities for his disappearance. So Carol is still continuing to do what she does best. She's pounding her shoes on the halls of Congress, working so hard to get the Big Cat Public Safety Act passed. That's the law that would ban private ownership of big cats and prohibit big cat cub public encounters, and is also running her wonderful accredited big cat sanctuary, doing bobcat rescue and rehabilitation in Florida, keeping very busy and doing great work as always.
How close is that legislation from being a real thing, a real law? Are we still a ways or what?
Well, we'll see. Hopefully Congress will bring it up for a vote. It seems like at this point it would pass and President Biden would bring it up for a vote. But there's a lot of drama going on in Congress right now. It's not clear at this point when it will come up for a vote. And that's why it's so important for everyone to call their federal legislators, both in the Senate and the House, and tell them not only that you want them to support the Big Cat Public Safety Act, but that it needs to come up for a vote in this session of Congress. That's critically important.
See, now this is one of the things about the whole Joe Exotic thing. Would we be this far were it not for the kind of attention Joe Exotic and the show and all his antics brought to this issue?
I think there's absolutely no denying that the Tiger King phenomenon, if the Big Cat Public Safety Act passes, that the Tiger King phenomenon will have played a role in that. There's no doubt that the Tiger King phenomenon played a major role in the USDA and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service referring a case to the U.S. Department of Justice for the first time relating to takes of endangered big cats used in cub petting under the ESA and under the Animal Welfare Act.
Just in time for Year of the Tiger, the Lunar New Year, we see Joe Exotic resentenced, a reduction of just 1 year, and we see, I guess, the most important thing, the animals, the tigers. And, the Washington Post did that story a couple of years back that said there are more tigers in captivity in America than there are in the wild, which is just an astonishing fact. Are they doing better now because Joe Exotic is away and we've come this far with all the work that you've done with PETA?
Yeah, there are still almost certainly more tigers in captivity in the United States than there are in the wild. But the critically important fact now is that those numbers are not growing exponentially as they were when these tiger kingpins were operating. At Joe's roadside zoo, they would have oftentimes 4 cubs at a time who they were using for encounters, and they had to replace those cubs every 4 months. And at the time, there were numerous facilities across the country, sometimes up to 20 or more at one time doing these encounters. And so you do the math and the numbers of cubs who were being pumped into this industry and then discarded or killed, that has almost completely stopped at this point.
And that's great progress, great news. But I know also this is not the only thing that your division CALE is up to. Tell me about Dolly the Bear.
Yes, so last fall, PETA saw a USDA inspection report for a roadside zoo in Michigan called Sunrise Side Exotic Park. And it told the story of a bear named Grizzy who'd had a horrific wound on his face. It was festering. It had been untreated. And it got so bad that the USDA actually confiscated him from Sunrise Side. Sunrise Side was a roadside zoo in Tawas City, Michigan. It closed to the public several years ago. Back around 2015, it earned headlines after a woman's finger was bitten off when she was allowed to enter a juvenile lion's enclosure. And the zoo closed down shortly after that. So after PETA saw that USDA inspection report, we looked at the inventory list of the animals who were left, and there were only a few animals left. A bear named Dolly and this family of 3 foxes. And so I gave them a call and we were able to work out an agreement. It's an elderly couple, and they decided that it was time to give up the animals and to allow them to go to a wonderful sanctuary. And so it all happened very quickly. Within about 15 minutes, we were able to get a yes from the owners. And within a few days, we were there in Tawas City and with the Wild Animal Sanctuary, and they were transporting Dolly and the sweet little fox family out to their sanctuary in Colorado.
Just think, what would have happened if the family had said, no, we're not going to give up Dolly and the fox? What would have happened then?
It's really worrisome because one of the things that USDA inspection report pointed out is that the facility's veterinarian hadn't been there in, I think, about a year and a half. And not only that, that veterinarian had retired. So these animals were getting no vet care. Obviously, for Grizzy, it got to a really advanced point where he was suffering immensely, and that's likely what would have happened to Dolly and the foxes as well.
I guess it's hard for me to imagine that people would say, well, we have these animals. We just want to keep them. We just want to keep them. And then we don't want to keep them. You can have them. I mean, I'm just trying to imagine what goes in their heads about what is the value of keeping them in the first place.
Yeah, it's hard to say. The psychology of exotic animal ownership is a fascinating topic, and it's something that we think about a lot. But thankfully, in this case, we were able to come to an agreement, and we've been able to send. The former owners have asked for updates on how Dolly and the foxes are doing, and so we've been able to share how everything is going. When after Dolly was released into her huge naturalistic habitat where she's now hibernating for the winter, and the sanctuary built brand new enclosure for the foxes. It has tall grass for them to hide in. At Sunrise Side, they were in a tiny, tiny cage, about half the size of a normal dog pen. It was filthy. There was a family of rodents living underneath. There was nothing natural about it. But now they're able to scent mark and engage in normal fox behavior, and their personalities are now showing through. It's really wonderful to see.
Did the people who held Dolly and the foxes, they weren't doing anything illegal necessarily. Maybe they were neglectful, but were they if they held on to them, were they in violation of anything that could have been brought against them?
Well, they certainly could have been charged with cruelty to animals for failing to provide Grizzy with veterinary care. That's a legal requirement in every state. If you have an animal and that animal is sick, you're required to provide them with veterinary care. With Grizzy, they didn't do that. They haven't been charged with cruelty to animals. It's likely that they won't be. But thankfully, the most important thing is that all of those animals now are out of there. They're safe, and they're at a wonderful facility where they will get and are getting appropriate veterinary care and all the other care that they could potentially want. And I should add that anyone who wants to see both the conditions in which they were held at Sunrise Side and how they're doing now at the Wild Animal Sanctuary can go to PETA.org to see an update video of Dolly and the foxes.
Yeah. And how long were they there again? I mean, how long were they in that kind of situation? You said more than a year, right? A year and a half? Or not year and a half not seeing the vet?
That's right. Yeah, around a year and a half not seeing the vet. I'm not sure how long the foxes have been there. Dolly and Grizzy were purchased from a breeder, I think around 20 years ago. So they'd been held at Sunrise Side for a very long time.
Wow. And of course, now this points to the idea that if there weren't the breeders selling animals to people who have this hankering to be roadside zoo people or to have these captive animals, we wouldn't have this problem.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And, while we have significantly slowed the progress of tiger king breeding in the country, we are still seeing some bear cub breeding. We're seeing bear cub petting. That's something that we'll see more in the spring and summer. Bears are born right around this time every year in January or February, and so they're often used in cub petting encounters during the summer tourist season. So it's really important for anyone who sees anything like that. Please don't ever have your photo taken with any wild animal, especially a baby wild animal. And if you hear of anything like that happening, contact PETA so we can look into it.
So the tigers are no longer because of what's happened with Joe Exotic, but is the next on the list the bear cub petting? Is that the next highest concern on the part of your group, CALE?
It is. It is. Bear cub petting is a major problem. Thankfully, we don't have that constant cycle that we see with tiger cub petting, because most bear species, particularly the ones who are used in cub petting, black bears and brown bears, they're only born once a year. So you can't constantly impregnate a bear and have more cubs every few months. That's just not possible physiologically. But it's just as cruel to both the mothers and the cubs for basically all the same reasons. But most of the bear species that are used for these encounters aren't protected by the Endangered Species Act. So we don't necessarily have the legal options to go in and sue directly on behalf of these bears. And so that's why we need the U.S. Department of Agriculture to step in, to do their job, and to prohibit all forms of public contact with wildlife. It's never beneficial to the wildlife. It's always cruel, and the USDA needs to stop it. And so that's another thing that people can do, is reach out to the USDA and call for a ban on these types of encounters. And you'll see something new from PETA coming out about that in the next couple of months.
Because I would think that, okay, there might be some people out there who are, oh, I'm a big, strong guy, I can deal with the animals. I'm a naturalist. I love the animals. They love me. And I guess that's how it all begins, right? And then but these encounters, these encounters are they verboten? Are there laws that forbid these encounters?
Not usually. Certainly, PETA argues that it is illegal under the Animal Welfare Act. The Animal Welfare Act, in the statute, Congress requires the U.S. Department of Agriculture to ensure the humane treatment of animals. And there's nothing humane about prematurely separating a baby bear from his or her mother at just a few months old, when they would naturally stay with them for 2 years. And just like with tigers, baby bears expect to be learning from their mother for those 2 years, learning how to be a bear, socializing with just their mother and potentially their siblings. And it's terrifying and traumatizing for them to be passed from human to human, used for these encounters. And just like tigers, their immune systems aren't fully developed yet. And so they're susceptible to diseases from humans. So for all of those reasons and more, we've got to put a stop to this industry too. And PETA is working hard on that.
And so this is the right time, you said, if this is when bears are usually giving birth, this is when bear cubs are sometimes separated, this time, January, February, March?
Yeah, in a couple of months is when they would start pulling the bears from their mothers. Baby bears are really pretty helpless when they're first born. It takes a little longer for them to be pulled, but still they would naturally be with their mothers for around 2 years. So pulling them at just a few months old is traumatic, both for the babies and for the mothers.
So right now there are people who have these pregnant bears in captivity here in the United States, and they're just waiting to yank the cubs away.
Absolutely. The cubs are probably already sold.
Oh, so now they have an obligation. They feel like, okay, no matter what, it may seem immoral to someone coming and watching, but these cubs are bought and paid for, they feel, right? So they somehow get that barrier up, their moral barrier, so they can do that. But what they're doing is really something that's really inhumane. It's anti-bear. It's it's just, what are the bears like when they don't have that kind of connection with their parents, their mom?
One of the things that we often see with bears who've been prematurely separated from their mothers, and you can see video of this if you go to PETA.org and search for Oswald's Bear Ranch. That is the most notorious bear cub petting facility in the country. It's in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. And so what you'll see is it's a suckling behavior. So they'll suckle on their own body parts or on other bears if they're housed with other bears. And it's basically just simulating nursing from their mother because they were denied that. And it turns into an abnormal repetitive behavior, which is basically a behavior that wild animals use to cope with severe psychological distress. So it's the same type of thing as when you see a tiger pacing along a fence line or a bear biting on their cage bars. These baby bears are distraught from having been prematurely torn from their mothers, and the suckling behavior is what they use to cope with that. And it's something that they will often do for their entire lives. The hair will be missing from those parts of their bodies. Sometimes they'll develop rashes and other wounds from the suckling behavior. But anytime you see, I'm sure anyone who's listening to this podcast will never go to a roadside zoo, so they'll never see anything like this. But when you see on PETA's website video of baby bears suckling on themselves, that's what this is.
So what happens when if someone does see a bear in a roadside zoo, the cubs have been taken from their mother? Are they safe? Is it a dangerous situation because of what the bear may or may not do? Or are people, what I'm getting at, is it less innocent than it looks for an unsuspecting person who stops off at a roadside zoo?
Yeah, there's nothing innocent about it. Any type of cub encounter or wild animal encounter, what it means is cruelty and suffering for those animals from the moment that they're born until the moment that they die. And what we've learned from experts is, it's not just when they're cubs that these animals suffer. Because they're denied that education from the mother and that bonding from the mother, it impacts these bears psychologically for the rest of their lives. And they actually become more dangerous to humans because they're so unpredictable. They haven't learned really what it means to be a bear. And so they're actually more likely to attack humans than bears who haven't been prematurely separated from their mothers.
Yeah. So people should beware and just not patronize any of these places. And that's next on the list to get these roadside zoos featuring bears off the radar, or not, just to end that practice. But the one good thing, the tiger cub, tigers, not lions, right? Just tigers, or all big cats.
All big cats, really? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and mostly because of the Joe Exotic notoriety and what PETA did. All that now is really pretty dormant for the better.
That's right. We've been able to cut off the breeding at the source. And so and we've been able to educate the public with the help of Tiger King. And so at this point, we've virtually cut off the supply and cut off the demand. There are really only 2 facilities in the country left operating who are still doing big cat encounters. And they're in our sites, and they won't be operating for long either.
Well, congratulations again, Brittany, for your work and for giving us an update on what's going on with not just Joe Exotic, Joe Maldonado Passage, but also Dolly the Bear.
Just think of a bear with blonde hair.
Okay. Well, Brittany, thanks again. It's always great talking to you. Congratulations for the good work you've done on shutting these places down.
Oh, it is my pleasure. Believe me. Thank you so much.
Brittany Peet, Deputy General Counsel for PETA's CALE group, also known as the Captive Animal Law Enforcement Group, on the bad news for the Tiger King in the Year of the Tiger. The animals won. And on the rescue of Dolly the Bear, who's now in sanctuary in Colorado. And the new focus after tigers, bears, and the bear cub petting industry. For more, go to PETA.org. And that's our show for today. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to send your friends a link and tell them about the show. Tell them you like the PETA Podcast. Contact us at PETA.org. You can find me on Twitter at Emilamok, that's EMILAMOK, or see my vlog at AMOK.com, or see my work at ALDEF, the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund. That's at ALDEF, AALDEF.org/blog. Once again, thank you for listening. Check out all our episodes on your favorite podcast app or on Apple Podcasts, where you can subscribe to as well as rate and review the show. It helps get the word out about the issues you care about. Our music is provided by Carbon Works. Check them out on YouTube. And join us again next time for more insight into animal rights and the fight for a cruelty-free world on the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil Guillermo.